Question number 7, Catherine Delahunty.
Kia ora koe, Mr Speaker. It's Sign Language Week and let's sign. To the Minister of Social Development.
Sign.
I've done my signing. Does she stand by her statement regarding family violence services that funding is being moved to the front line, not away from it?
Mr.
The
Speaker,
Honourable Paula Bennett.
Yes, I make no apologies for this government's focus on moving funding to the front line where it is most certainly needed.
Catherine Delahunty.
Supplementary, Mr Speaker. Does she agree that services for women in crisis, like Women's Refuge Safe Homes, are frontline family violence services and are particularly important when domestic assaults are on the rise?
The Honourable Paula
Mr.
Bennett.
Speaker, yes, I think the refuges in New Zealand do a fantastic job, are incredibly necessary. Their bed nights are vitally important, and the services they provide should be kept separate from government and continue.
Catherine Delahunty.
To the Minister. Why then did Ministry of Social Development Deputy Chief Executive Richard Wood indicate to Women's Refuge on 20th April 2011 that $382,000 would be cut from their contract and would come from short-term residential services for women in crisis?
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr Speaker, I would need to check what the Deputy Chief Executive said on that day. But from my understanding is that the Women's Refuge had money that was going from an education fund, that they were actually using some of that for frontline services, that because that education fund is being changed into the family funding services that Minister Turi is doing, they can apply for it via that. And in fact, it would sound like they've got a good chance of getting it because it's actually for frontline services and they were already doing that.
Catherine Delahunty.
Supplementary, Mr Speaker. How does she explain the discrepancy between what her officials have told Women's Refuge about short-term residential services being affected and her own statement on 28th April that there should be no effect on residential services?
The Honourable Paula
Mr
Bennett.
Speaker, I suppose I would say that all the applications are in now, although I believe for the collective they've got until the 4th of May to get their application in. The decisions will be made as, well actually it's yesterday because we are already on the... So as a consequence, those are being analysed now. The decisions will be made as soon as possible. I sort of acknowledge it's been quite a short application process, but we want to get back to those services as quickly as possible so that they know what's going on.
Catherine Delahunty.
Does she support Women's Refuge advocating on behalf of at-risk women and children, for example, by drawing up safety plans for them and their families?
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr Speaker, we certainly do, but I suppose at the moment we're saying the focus really needs to go on frontline services as well, and certainly those bed nights that we were talking about. We believe that actually both can be done, so that's a key focus for it. More than $62.4 million actually going into funding for family violence services, and we want to continue that. In fact, we want to grow that spend, but right now we want to actually move that forward and make sure we're doing those frontline services.
Catherine Delahunty.
Given the Minister's previous answer that she does support safety plans, why then did she indicate on the 28th of April that funding for Women's Refuge to provide advocacy services and lobby government would not continue?
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr Speaker, because the Minister has decided that we are actually moving the money into frontline services. So we're not saying that it's not important, but we are saying that what we need is evidence that actually we've spent a lot of time, It's Not OK campaign and others, and raising an awareness and making sure that people are actually getting that kind of service. Now we want to make sure as a consequence of that we have far more incidences of family violence being reported and people needing help. We want to make sure they're getting the actual help and the bed nights and the assistance they need.
Catherine Delahunty.
Supplementary, Mr Speaker. If domestic violence is really not okay, why is it okay to cut from these frontline refuge, residential and advocacy services?
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr Speaker, I suppose I'll just repeat what I said in a previous question, which is actual overall funding to refuges, both part of and separate from the collective, has increased by 43% over the last 4 years. We are actually putting more money into those refuges than ever have before. I'm proud of that. We will continue to do that. And we know that fundamentally they make a difference, and so will the funding that is going into those services.
Question number, point of order, the Honourable Trevor Mallard.
I know this is slightly unusual, and I'm not asking for leave myself, but there's clearly a discrepancy here, and I understood the member to indicate that she had a copy of a letter from Mr Woods, and if
No,
she
order,
hasn't-
order. This is not a valid use of points of order process. Question number 8. The Honourable